Guys, welcome back to another video. It is me, Mashir's Cameron, and today we are here with another superhero criminal court case. So this isn't really a single court case. We're actually looking at 4 different court cases, and we're going to be discussing why Vigilantism is villainy. And that's the name of the video, but what this video is really going to be honing in on is why a vigilante can never get any criminals in prison. So we're going to be using 5 different American court cases that will be directly related to 4 different DC situations with vigilantes. 3 of them are vigilantes, one of them is like an ex-vigilante. And then we're going to be talking about why none of these things people could ever get anything done. So we're going to be connecting to a few different videos. This is very different than some of the other ones I've done, because this one's talking more about a generalization rather than looking at a specific court case. However, hopefully in a few days, we're going to be doing a retrial of the Green Arrow. Instead of just looking at season 1, we're going to be looking at seasons 1 through 3. And then we're probably going to do seasons 1 through 6 at some point, but who knows. So before we get into it, though, I have to talk about the Google Classroom for a second. If you do want to join it, we go really in-depth with all of these cases. And I will say, the Magneto video didn't do very well, except I feel like that was one of the best ones I've done. So I will say, just check out that classroom, look through it. You can learn a lot more about this type of stuff. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. And let's just jump right into this video. So the first thing we're going to be talking about before we get into any of our superhero stuff is a court case from 1961 called Mapp v. Ohio. So this is one of the most important court cases pretty much in American history. And before we even talk about that, we kind of have to talk about what the Fourth Amendment is. And pretty much a lot of what I'm talking about is American. All of it is really. But this is going to go to a lot of different countries. I'm just talking about the American laws because I'm American. And pretty much what the Fourth Amendment is it means that the police or anyone can't search things without a warrant. That's like the general one-sentence thing. That's all you really need to know. And in 1961, what happened is some police searched Mapp's house, and it led to like a huge thing because they didn't have a warrant. So what Mapp v. Ohio created was something called the exclusionary rule, which is one of the most important things in criminal law. And what the exclusionary rule means is that any evidence found during an illegal search or seizure cannot be used in any court. So for example, if someone searches like a house and they don't have a warrant, let's say they find like drugs in a house and they don't have a warrant, they can't use the evidence that they found drugs in the house in their case. They could find, if they got a warrant, they can't get a warrant and then come back based on that. What they could do is, let's say they got a warrant for something else. Like let's say they had there was another thing in another house with the same person, they could get a warrant for that, then they could use that evidence. However, now you kind of see why this is such an issue. Because, for example, let's say any vigilante like searches like an abandoned warehouse or something, and they don't have a warrant, any evidence found in that place is immediately can't be used. And it really makes you question like how they're always like the lawyers are like, we put them in prison, except none of the evidence they ever have against them could ever be used. If like someone was already, if like they sent people after them, they said, this person, we have evidence to put them in prison, then that's okay. But if they don't have evidence prior to that, and it's pretty much how in a lot of these CW shows, we're going to be looking at the Flash and Arrow for CW, and then Batman and Wonder Woman for DCEU, or / just DC movies. And for both Flash and Arrow, you have those like people in the chair who are like looking over the city and be like, oh, there's a robbery here. Can you really like base it off that? And it's a very interesting thing, because if you can't base it correctly off it, like if you're basing it specifically off that, sure, they're gonna have a criminal record. You find them, you have like, say, drugs or weapons or something, you can't use any of that evidence. So every single time that happens, a vigilante may be putting away someone bad, but they're not doing it legally. And I think that you're now looking at morals. Sure, you could be saying, well, they're putting away bad guys, but they're doing it illegally. So I think this is one of the biggest reasons why vigilantism isn't okay, and I don't think people really think about it. People think about how they're doing things outside of the law. This is outside the law. If they don't have a warrant, this is illegal. So let's get into our superhero things. Let's contextualize it. And first, we're going to be talking about Green Arrow. So some of these things can be talked about for multiple cases. For example, a case we're going to be talking about later is Kylo v. United States, which is kind of using military-grade technology to find things and that'll be excluded. We're going to talk more about that later. But right now, when we're talking about Green Arrow, we're going to be talking about a case. Well, we're really going to be talking about, firstly, breaking into places and using that overhead surveillance. And we're not going to be talking about any types of technology or all that. But Green Arrow is just breaking into places and specifically using that overhead surveillance by Felicity. That's the main thing we're focusing on here. The fact that she's using that surveillance is the main thing because we're talking about the reason Katz v. United States from 1967. So this is 6 years after Mapp v. Ohio. And what this did is it established a reasonable expectation of privacy test, which pretty much expanded the Fourth Amendment to include certain forms of surveillance. And this doesn't even have to do with physical trespassing. So even if someone is on is using a drone, and they're using the drone to spy on someone, that's that is breaking Katz v. United States. And I think there have been things to use like drones. I think that's a little bit different. But yes, there is actually. We're going to be talking about it later. But with Katz v. United States, when you're using that technology and just finding them and tracking them, that is breaking that reasonable expectation of privacy. And this is even without trespassing. With Arrow trespassing these places, let's say they find them in a house, if he breaks into that house, that's doubling down on it. So the reasonable expectation of privacy pretty much makes it so they can't spy on you. And here they very much, and Arrow does this all the time. And I think this can really be said about The Flash. I haven't seen Supergirl in decades, but I feel like it could be the same there. It's a very simple thing that the CW shows just love to do, but it makes a lot of sense. Why? I don't think people think about this all the time, but they're oh, they're on here with breaking into satellites. I think this, in contrast with Kylo of the United States, really does a damage on these people. I know I'm talking about Kylo a lot. I'm not going to be getting into that yet because I really want to talk about that with Batman. But with Kat, it's such an important one because you can't just track people based on a random thing. You need to have that evidence, which is something so huge. And Arrow breaks that time and time again. Next up is The Flash. I'm never going to really make why Flash is a villain video because I don't have the heart to do that. But the main thing I'm talking about here is how him and specifically Iris gets these anonymous tips through her phone. Her phone has that little send-in things if things are bad, and she gets a tip, and then they go to find the peoples. That is breaking a case called Illinois v. Gates, and we're going to be talking about that one in a second. But I just want to think reasonably here. Why would you be allowed to just get an anonymous tip and just use that in any court case you want? So, what is Illinois v. Gates? So, this is a case that replaced another case, which was Spinelli v. something. But what this case really does is it really tests the totality of the circumstances. That's a very interesting term, but pretty much it replaces the two-prong test. And what the two-prong test of Spinelli's case really tested was you had to answer both prongs in a Spinelli world. And what that meant is if the police had both, you could be arrested or searched or whatever. If they only had one, it wouldn't count. So the two prongs were, is it from a trusted source, and has the officer observed it, or is there reasonably evidence to believe it? So an anonymous tip doesn't fall under really the category of it being a trusted source, because that was only changed with Prado Navarrete v. California, and that was in 2014. Currently we're in the 80s, and we're not going to be talking about Navarrete v. California, because it just kind of makes it weird. But what Illinois v. Gates changes is it now is a one-prong test instead of two-prong. So instead of having to have it both from a trusted source and to have reasonable evidence, you only need one. So even if it's just from a trusted source, they can search or whatever. And if there is reasonable evidence, they can search or whatever. So what the main issue here is the fact that they don't have either. And the reason why I say that is when Iris is getting those tips and stuff, those aren't trusted sources. Those are anonymous tips. So those aren't trusted sources that they could say, it's okay. These are trusted sources, passes the test, because they don't know who they are. If it's from a source like Joe, then it's okay. But at this time, or when Iris was using her blog and stuff, those aren't trusted sources. So her getting an opinion like, oh, there's something going on here, that's not a trusted thing. So wherever they go, that is, unless it's like in a public place, if they're like, oh, there's this weird activity going on in this warehouse from a random anonymous person, they can't do anything about it. And that's the main thing that Illinois v. Gates really tries to push out. And it's such an interesting case because it does make it easier for the police to do things. But even with vigilantism, they only need one. And for example, if they like observe the criminal activity going on, then it's okay. Then it's fine. But the issue is they don't. And it's not just like observing, because there has to be like a factual basis for it. So it's not like you can just like go up and be like, oh, I watched it happen, so it must be true. There has to be a basis for it. There has to be a factual basis. And in this scenario, there just isn't. And most of the scenarios in the show, there isn't, because they're like, we're pressed for time, we have to go. Except every time they do so, they're breaking the law. And even though they're like, the Flash is a hero, I feel like that kind of ignores all of these times that they can break the rights of citizens. So if you think about it this way, if they break Illinois v. Gates, you could be like, okay, fine, because like they're still helping people by breaking it. But now look at it this way. If they're allowed to break that, why can't they break Cats v. United States, which we just talked about? Why can't they do that? And that's where the ground really gets murky. Now we're going to move on to our third hero, and this is Batman. So in the case People v. The Dark Knight, which we did about a month ago, we discussed in The Dark Knight how he used that sonar, how he had that massive sonar thing, and he used that sonar to pretty much like, it wasn't like tracking the Joker, but like he like went into everyone's houses, and I think it should be playing at some point now, but they went into everyone's houses, they were seeing all this weird stuff with the sonar, and they saw everything. Like he could see whatever was going on in every house. And obviously it's blurry, but it still worked. So when we're talking about this case from the Dark Knight, we're going to be talking about this in contrast with a case called Kylo v. United States from 2001. So I've mentioned this a few times during the video because this is such a really easy case to put with vigilantism. But what the case was about was that thermal imaging couldn't be used to search people. Because what pretty much happened is the police used like a thermal camera to search a house without a warrant, and they didn't even go in the house. Like outside the house, they used the imaging and then used that as it. And they said that that violated the Fourth Amendment. And what this law really made was any military grade technology or technology not available to the public can't be used to search people without a warrant. So if they were using like normal binoculars you get in a normal store, then that's fine. But it can't be military grade technology. So even though this is about thermal imaging, that isn't the law it created. And if you look at the Batman case, it was with ish thermal imaging, but it's not something available to the public. So when Batman uses a sonar, not just is it the whole thing with the Patriot Act, which I discussed in another video, you should check that one out by the way, but it's really with Kylo v. United States, it isn't legal for them to use military grade technology to do this to all the houses. And as I discussed in my video, it's like 30 minutes, so I suggest you check it out. But I discussed there, like, you can't really use the thermal imaging. Like, yes, the sonar is good, but is it justifying the means? Yes, it's stopping the Joker, but do the ends justify the means of that? And I said it doesn't. But a lot of people definitely would disagree. So what I said here is something a little bit different, is that when we're talking about Map v. Ohio, and saying, could vigilantes do this with Map v. Ohio in place? Here they can't because of Kylo v. United States. And this is the same for Arrow and the Flash, but it's something to think about. And I think it really adds another layer to vigilantism. And the final one is about Wonder Woman. And this one's a little bit different because we're going to be talking about a case that is a little bit more abstract, I'll say, but I think it will help with it. So for Wonder Woman uses her lasso and it forces people to tell the truth, which is kind of forcing answers out of someone without them willingly giving them. And this gave me an idea to another case called Riley v. California from 2014. And what this case did is it ruled that the police must obtain a warrant to search password-protected the digital contents of a password-protected phone. And very similarly, your brain isn't necessarily password-protected, but the police can't just search your brain for answers, or then there wouldn't be a reason for detectives and stuff. So when you look at Wonder Woman's lasso, she's using her lasso to force answers out of people without them giving consent or anything, which is technically breaking Riley v. California, because they can't force open a phone with a password lock. So when you think about it, it really does show a huge issue, a huge, really glaring issue. But with Riley v. California, yes, there isn't a phone involved with the lasso, but your brain isn't, you can't search someone's brain without their permission, and that's something that Wonder Woman does. And Wonder Woman isn't as much of a vigilante as the other ones are, but she does have these very, not vigilante-like actions, but she isn't hired by anyone for most of her time, I believe, to really do what she does, which makes her a vigilante, and mean that she's forcing answers out of people, which is breaking the exclusion, which is adding to the exclusionary rule of Map v. Ohio. So if we look at these 4 cases now, I do want to wrap this up. This has been, I think, a little bit shorter, but I think the discussion now will be pretty long. So let's look at this. We have the Flash, we have Arrow, we have Batman, and we have Wonder Woman. If we look at all of these using 4 different cases, which are Illinois v. Gates, Katz v. United States, Kylo v. United States, and Riley v. California, all of them include the superhero doing an action that would fall into the exclusionary rule created in Map v. Ohio that would lead to any evidence they find being voided. So anytime the Flash gets an anonymous tip, uses that, doesn't count. Anytime Arrow breaks into a warehouse using the unallowed surveillance, doesn't count. Anytime Batman uses the sonar, doesn't count. Anytime Wonder Woman uses the lasso, doesn't count. And I think this starts to lead to what this kind of ruins about vigilantism. Because yes, they're doing these good actions, they're putting away people that are worse. However, pretty much the entire thing that vigilantes are people who are putting away others that are worse than them, which you can say is a good thing. But for example, the police, they follow this code, and sometimes they have to break it, and that's something we see in a ton of these shows. But at this point, all the vigilantes are doing are forcibly taking things that they are not allowed to take. Because Map v. Ohio is one of the most important cases you will ever learn about, because it forces things to be excluded. So when you look at all of these vigilantes, and even you could think about people like Superman with his X-ray vision, which would probably go to like either Kylo v. United States, maybe Katz. I could even make an argument for Riley v. California. And then there's so many others. You could talk about Marvel characters, but ever since I did that Magneto video that didn't do well, I'm probably not going to talk about many other Marvel characters. But there's so many things you can mention. And it's just such an interesting thing. But now let's think about, for example, if we were talking about this, which is something I do want to do, about aliens, then that would be such a different case. But that's not what we're talking about today. So with these vigilantes, everything they're doing is illegal because nothing that they find, unless they find it based on observation with the Illinois v. Gates two-prong test, if they hit one of the prongs, then it's okay. Or if they're using normal technology or not using the lasso or things like that, then it's okay. However, most of the time they don't do that because they're doing what's most beneficial for them rather than what's most beneficial for the law. So obviously vigilantes are always outside the law. But why are we talking about vigilante being villainy? And the reason why I say that is because, yes, the vigilantes aren't working with the police. They're not doing things by their code. But everything they're doing is illegal. There isn't anything they're doing is legal because I think some people think, oh, well, they're putting these bad guys away by doing these things and it's legal. Nothing they're doing is legal. I think honestly, we could go through 5 more videos of this and you probably couldn't find a single hero that doesn't doesn't do a single thing legal, which is such an interesting thing to think about because we look up to these heroes that break this one law that pretty much makes it so they lose their power to do whatever they want, which is good for us. I'll say if we lived in a superhero world, this would be good for us. However, no one in court argues this, which is the other thing I want to talk about. If vigilantes are allowed to do this all the time, like in Arrow season 3, Arrow's like, oh my god, all the villains came back out on the streets. But he never had reason to lock up most of them because he was just finding them and locking them up, even though he was breaking the exclusionary rule. So any lawyer should not have been able to put them away. So I think what the big thing is here is not just could the heroes not do anything, but the lawyers are just stupid, which is something I find that happens in a lot of vigilante shows. Either they're way too smart or they're way too dumb. Like there never is a middle ground, and I kind of find that annoying. But I think that's really all I want to say here. This was my video really just talking about different ways that vigilantism can be seen as villainy. Thought this would be a fun video, a little bit different than just like why this is a villain. We're going to be doing an Arrow retrial soon. Very interested. Very excited for that. Aside from that, I don't think I have that much else to say. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.